My dear child, there is a truth that was once spoken in a quiet moment, something never meant to reach you so soon. Yet somehow its weight has been drawing closer with every passing hour, as if time itself refused to let it stay hidden. The person you love once stood before someone they deeply trust, and in that brief encounter, something in them shifted. Their voice softened. It slowed down. It carried a careful kind of hesitation, like they were holding back something fragile, something they didn't want to break just by speaking it aloud. What they said about you did not begin with your name. It began with a pause, with silence. And that silence was not empty, it was full of meaning. Don't rush past this, because what unfolded in that conversation was not something ordinary. There was a moment in which the entire atmosphere changed, as if the air itself became heavier. Even before you were ever mentioned, emotion was already present in the room, unspoken but undeniable. The person speaking avoided eye contact at first, not because they had nothing to say, but because too much was already rising inside them and they didn't know how to organize it into words. It was easier to look away than to reveal what was building within. Then came a simple question from the listener. Why do you keep thinking about them? And for a few seconds, there was nothing. No reply. Just stillness. That pause mattered more than any immediate answer could have. Because real emotion does not rush. It settles. It weighs itself. It chooses its words carefully before it becomes speech. When the response finally came, it was slow and intentional, as though the thoughts had been living inside them for a long time, waiting for a moment like this to finally surface. I don't really know how to explain it, they said, but something about them doesn't leave me. Even when life moves on, that feeling stays. Those words were not casual. They came from reflection, from moments of private thought they had never shared with anyone. And while speaking, it was clear they were not just describing you, they were remembering you. A voice, a moment, a presence, something small that had somehow settled deeply inside them without permission. The conversation did not stop there. Is it serious? The listener asked. Again, silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't avoidance. It was the kind of silence that appears when someone already knows the truth but struggles to admit how large it has become. Then came the answer. Whenever I try to move past it, something brings it back. That one admission changed the direction of everything, because at that point it was no longer a passing thought. It had become something persistent, something that survives distraction, distance, and even effort to forget. The listener leaned in slightly, realizing this was not casual emotion anymore. This was something that had stayed alive through time itself. And then came something even more revealing. They didn't start with how you look or what you do. Instead, they spoke about how your memory feels inside them. Even when they're not here, they said quietly, there's this strange sense of calm when I think about them. That word, calm, hung in the air. Because people don't describe calm unless something in them has been softened by it. Calm means your presence reached places where tension once lived. It means your memory didn't disturb them. It settled them. It stayed with them in a way that didn't create chaos, but still refused to disappear. The conversation deepened. Then why haven't you said anything more? The listener asked. The answer came without delay. Because some things feel too important to speak about carelessly. And in that sentence, something deeper was revealed. Not fear, not confusion, but protection. People do not hold back what is empty. They hold back what feels meaningful enough to lose weight if spoken incorrectly. What they felt was not being hidden because it was weak, but because it mattered too much to be treated lightly. Then came a statement that shifted everything again. Sometimes I wonder if they realize how much they've changed the way I think. Pause on that, because that is not a small observation. That is recognition of impact. That is someone admitting that your presence did not just pass through their life, it reshaped something inside it. You may never have noticed the exact moment it happened, but in them it became unforgettable. Something about you settled deeper than surface memory. It stayed. Then what are you afraid of? the listener asked next. For the first time, their voice lowered, almost a whisper. What I feel might already be bigger than what I planned. That line was not spoken lightly. It came from someone who once thought they could measure emotion, control it, define it, but discovered instead that it had grown beyond containment. Bigger than planned means it no longer fits inside logic. It means what started quietly has expanded beyond expectation. And even then, your presence returned in their thoughts again, softer now, almost reverent in tone, as if even your name had become something that changes the atmosphere when spoken. Then if they were here right now, the listener asked finally, what would you tell them? Silence followed once more. But this silence was different. It was not uncertainty. It was depth. The kind of depth that gathers everything a person has felt but never released. And when they finally spoke, it came with clarity they had been holding back for far too long. I would tell them they matter more than they realize. That was the sentence that stayed behind after everything else faded. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. And honesty like that does not leave easily. It continues to echo long after the moment has passed, because some words don't end when they are spoken. They continue living in the mind of the one who hears them, and in the heart of the one who finally says them out loud after too much silence. And maybe that is why this carries weight for you now. Not because every feeling is fully explained, but because sometimes truth arrives slowly through conversations that were never meant to reach you directly. The listener then asks softly, so why keep it all inside? And this time, the answer did not come as quickly as before. It lingered at the edge of their thoughts, as if they had asked themselves the same question many times but never fully answered it aloud. Because when something matters that deeply, speaking, it feels like exposure. And silence, even when heavy, can feel safer than risking what might happen once it is finally said. Because sometimes, when something carries too much meaning, a person becomes careful with every single word they choose. That is not fear, it is significance. Carefulness appears when someone is afraid, not of speaking, but of being misunderstood. Do not skip this, because the strongest revelation still has not come forward. The listener then asked a final question that shifted everything. What would surprise them most if they heard you right now? And for the first time, there was no long pause. The answer arrived immediately, without hesitation. That I speak about them here with more honesty than I ever have anywhere else. That one sentence changed the entire atmosphere, because honesty in private spaces often carries a different weight. It is not shaped for approval, it is not adjusted for impression. It is simply what remains when all pretending is removed. In that moment, there was no performance, no attempt to look composed, only something real being admitted for the first time without resistance. And then came a statement so unexpected that even the listener fell silent. Sometimes I hear something completely ordinary during the day, and it immediately reminds me of them. Think about that carefully, because ordinary moments becoming connected to someone is not random. It means that person has moved beyond attention and entered association. It means memory is no longer triggered by effort, it appears on its own. A sound, a word, a place, a passing thought, even something meaningless to others, suddenly becomes tied back to you. Stay until the end, because something huge is waiting for you. The listener asked softly, do you think they would believe any of this? A brief pause followed. Then came the reply. Probably not, because I never show how much is still in my mind. And that explained everything. Not all emotions are expressed outwardly. Some stay hidden because they are still being processed internally. Some truths remain behind silence simply because silence feels safer than revealing something too early, too openly, or too completely. But the truth had still found its way out. And before the conversation could settle, one more sentence slipped through, almost like something unintentional escaping control. If they ever knew everything I've said here, they would understand why forgetting them was never simple. And after that, the room felt different. No one rushed to fill the silence because some statements are too complete to interrupt. Do not skip, because what followed did not end in that moment. It continued long after the conversation itself was over. Later, when it should have ended, something changed. The person you love did not immediately leave. They stayed a little longer, as if something inside them was still unresolved, still moving beneath the surface. The listener noticed, but said nothing. Because silence in moments like that often reveals more than questions ever could. And it did. Without being prompted, they spoke again, slower this time, more grounded. There is something strange. Even when I decide not to think about them, something always brings them back. No hesitation, no filtering, just truth appearing as it is. The listener turned slightly, fully aware that this was no longer casual conversation. This had become something deeper, something closer to exposure than explanation. A pause followed, a heavy one. Then they added, "It happens in the middle of ordinary moments, and somehow it feels stronger each time." That detail matters more than it seems. Because thoughts that return randomly are one thing, but thoughts that return with increasing intensity are different. They are not fading, they are reinforcing themselves. Do not skip, because what came next changed the direction again. The listener asked carefully, "What comes back first? The memory, the feeling, or the question?" A short silence followed. Then the answer arrived. The feeling. And that changed everything. Because memory can be triggered by coincidence. Feeling is not random. Feeling returns only when something inside still recognizes unfinished meaning. They did not say your name yet. Instead, they looked down slightly, almost smiling to themselves, and spoke more quietly than before. It's hard to explain, but some people stay in your mind without asking permission. That line stayed in the air, because everyone understands memory. But not everyone understands presence that lingers without invitation, something that remains even when life moves forward. Stay until the end, because something huge is waiting for you. The listener asked again, "So what happens when their name comes up?" This time, there was no avoidance. Everything else becomes less important for a moment. That was the confession. Simple on the surface, but heavy in meaning. Because when everything else loses priority, even briefly, it reveals what naturally holds attention underneath everything else. Then came another admission, quieter, more reflective. "I noticed details I never thought I would care about." The listener asked, "What kind of details?" A breath. Small things, the way they speak, certain words they use, things nobody else would even notice. And that revealed what had been hidden all along. Attention is never neutral. It always reveals importance. People do not remember details without reason. They remember what quietly matters. Do not skip, because the deepest part came next. The listener said softly, "You sound like someone who has already thought about this too much." And for the first time, there was no denial. Instead, a simple acceptance. "Maybe I have. More than anyone knows." That sentence landed heavily. Because what is thought privately is often far deeper than what is ever spoken aloud. Then came something even quieter. "Sometimes I wonder if they can feel any of this, without me saying it." And that question revealed everything. Because people do not wonder about emotional connection unless the connection itself has already become persistent enough to feel real even in silence. The listener then asked one final question before everything shifted. If they were standing here right now and heard everything, what would be the hardest thing for you to admit? There was a longer silence this time, not empty, but heavy with reflection, as if the answer had to pass through several layers before it could be spoken. Then it finally came, that I've been trying to look normal while carrying much more than I ever planned to. And in that single sentence, everything quietly became clearer. Because trying to look normal is never just about appearance. It means something inside has already shifted. And carrying more than planned means the emotion didn't stay at its original size. It grew, It stayed. It accumulated over time without asking permission. Before the moment ended, they added nothing else. They simply left. But what followed after mattered even more than what was said inside that room. Because sometimes the most honest truth is not spoken during the conversation itself, it is revealed in what happens right after. The person you love took only a few steps away, then stopped. Not because anyone called them, not because anything interrupted them, but because their own thoughts became louder than the environment around them. Do not skip this, because this quiet moment revealed more than everything said before it. They stood still for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, as if replaying every sentence they had just spoken, every admission, every hesitation, every truth they allowed to surface. Then, very softly, almost without realizing it, they repeated your name under their breath, and that mattered more than it seemed, because people do not repeat a name in silence unless it still carries weight inside them, unless something about it continues to exist even after the conversation has ended. The listener, who had not fully walked away yet, noticed this pause and asked one final question from a distance. Why do you always go quiet after talking about them? There was no attempt to hide anything anymore. Because every time I speak honestly about them, I realize how much I usually keep inside. That answer changed the meaning of everything that had come before it. It confirmed that what was spoken earlier was not the full truth. Only fragments, pieces that managed to slip through restraint. Do not skip, because what came next carried even more weight. The listener stayed still and asked carefully, "Then what is still left unsaid?" A long silence followed. Not emptiness, but thoughtfulness, the kind that happens when someone is sorting through feelings too large to organize quickly. Then they answered, more quietly this time. Some days I act like I am focused on other things, but even then, something small reminds me of them before the day ends. That sentence sounded simple, but its meaning was deep. Because hidden remembrance is often stronger than spoken attention. When someone appears in your thoughts without effort, it means they are no longer just remembered. They are embedded into daily rhythm, into unconscious habit, into emotional repetition. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. The listener asked again, "What kind of small things?" And the answer came immediately, like it had already been stored inside them for too long. A phrase, a sound, a place, or even a moment that suddenly feels connected to them. That was not random, because connection is never forced into existence. It forms on its own when someone has already taken up more space internally than expected. And then, for the first time, something subtle changed. A smile appeared, small, unplanned, almost unnoticed at first. The listener saw it immediately. "Why are you smiling?" The answer came gently. "Because some memories show up before I even try to call them back." That line lingered in the air. Because memories that arrive without effort are not ordinary memories. They are emotional imprints, things that return on their own because they were never fully gone. Do not skip, because what came next was one of the strongest realizations so far. The listener said quietly, "You speak as if they changed something in you." A breath. Then the answer. They did, even if they never fully realized it. And that changed everything. Because people do not casually admit change, they only acknowledge it when the difference inside them has become undeniable. Then came something even more revealing. There are moments when I realize how naturally my thoughts go back to them, not forced, not intense, just natural. That word mattered. Natural return means it is no longer a choice, it is a pattern, something that happens on its own, without resistance, almost like the mind stops negotiating and simply follows what it has already accepted inside. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. The listener asked one final question before stepping away, as if they already knew the moment was closing, but still needed to touch the edge of it one last time. If they heard everything you said today, what would surprise them most? There was a pause before the answer came, not empty, but full, like the space between two thoughts where truth has to pass through something invisible before it becomes language. And this time, there was no hesitation. That I speak carefully on the outside, but inside, my thoughts are much louder than I ever show. That line did not feel like an answer that was created in the moment. It felt like something that had always been there, waiting for the right silence to expose it. That was the truth that had been present the entire time. Quiet outside, loud inside. Because some people don't express less because they feel less. They express less because what they feel has too many layers to translate into simple words. Too many directions at once, too many contradictions living in the same space without cancelling each other out. On the outside, they appear measured, controlled, almost difficult to read. But inside, there is movement that never fully stops, thoughts overlapping, emotions speaking over each other, entire conversations happening in silence that no one else ever hears. And the strange part is that they function like this every day, as if it is normal. As if carrying that much internal noise while presenting calm is just another way of existing. Before everything ended, they added one final thought, almost to themselves rather than to the other person, as if honesty had slipped past their usual filters without permission. Sometimes what matters most is revealed only in what you never say out loud. And that sentence stayed. It stayed not because it was dramatic, but because it was accurate in a way that could not be argued with. There are things that never survive translation into speech, not because they are untrue, but because language reduces them too much. It flattens what was once layered, turns depth into surface, and forces clarity where complexity used to live. Some truths don't need sound to be unforgettable. And what happened afterward, when they were completely alone, revealed something even deeper than anything they allowed themselves to admit in front of another person. The moment the external presence disappeared, the silence did not feel empty. It felt revealing, as if the absence of another person removed the need to organize thoughts into anything structured. The mind loosened its posture. What had been held back during conversation slowly returned, not as a single realization, but as a wave of unfinished sentences. They replayed the exchange again, not word for word, but feeling for feeling, noticing where they paused, where they softened their voice, where they said less than they meant. And in that replay, something subtle became clear. They had not actually hidden the truth. They had only filtered it into a form that felt safer to share. But alone, there was no need for that filter. And so the louder parts of them began to speak again. Not in words that could be written down easily, but in impressions, memories, fragments of thought that connected without permission. A realization they had been avoiding. A feeling they had labeled as not important enough. A memory they thought had lost its emotional weight, but had only gone quiet until now. There is a strange honesty that appears only in solitude. Not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that unfolds slowly when there is no one left to misunderstand it. They began to understand something they had never said directly. Their silence in front of others was not absence, it was selection. A constant decision about what could survive being spoken without being misunderstood, and what could only exist safely inside. And in that understanding, a softer truth emerged underneath everything else. That being quiet outside was never the same as being empty. It was full, too full sometimes, full of things that had never been given the right conditions to come out without losing meaning. The more they sat with that realization, the more the boundary between spoken and unspoken started to feel less like a separation and more like a tension, as if two versions of the same self had been living parallel lives, the one that speaks and the one that thinks, and only one of them had ever been allowed to be seen. But even that distinction started to blur, because in solitude there was no performance left to maintain, no need to appear composed, no need to explain or simplify. Only awareness remained, stretching further than usual, touching parts of thought that are normally ignored during interaction. And somewhere inside that quiet awareness, they recognized something that had been present all along, but never fully acknowledged. What feels unspoken is not always missing. Sometimes it is simply waiting for a moment where it will not be reduced. And that is why certain truths feel heavier when left inside, not because they are trapped, but because they are still whole, not divided into sentences, not softened into explanation, just fully present in their original form. The kind of presence that doesn't need to be spoken to remain real. And in that final recognition, even the silence began to feel different, not like absence, but like something that had finally been understood without needing to be translated at all.